cannot afford to miss a single moment of the next hour. Get ready to have your ideas about sexuality, love, and relationships blown wide open. It's time to get educated, entertained, and enlightened, as well as sexually empowered. You have now tuned into the Tantra Love, Sex, and Intimacy Show. Now, here's your host, Tanya Diamond.
Hello, everybody. I am happy to say that I am in the studio today. And, you know, I've been doing this gig from home the last few times, and it's very different sitting on the couch at home than it is sitting here with this big microphone in my face and headphones and, all that. It feels like it's real or something. Oh. And I have somebody else with me. I don't have Joshua with me today. Joshua's working with a client today, and so he left me kind of high and dry. Thanks, Joshua.
So it's Max today.
So I have Max with me today. Max is going to be my co-host. And, of course, we have our lovely producer, Sam. Yeah.
Yo.
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 Yeah, he does impressions for us every once in a while when he gets crazy.
Nice. I've heard one.
Did you?
Yeah, I heard one.
Which one was that? The only one I've ever done.
Sly Stallone.
Stallone, yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, so when I did that, I was in the middle of watching all the Rocky movies in a row.
Yeah.
And I got into character.
Very nice. So he was able to just get right in there. So remember, Max, you got to have your microphone like right in your face.
Right there.
Right. There you go.
Hey.
Awesome. All right. So here we are at the studio talking about Tantra, love, sex, and intimacy. And I want to say that recently it seems like sexual abuse is on everybody's tongue or every TV station.
Is that appropriate to say that?
Sexual abuse is on everybody's tongue. Maybe not. Maybe that was not so apropos, or maybe it was. I don't know. So I'm not very good with that whole PC thing. Anyway, Oprah just was doing this whole 3-part series on sexual abuse and actually going in. They sent somebody in to actually talk to the worst of the worst, which apparently are housed here off an island of Tacoma. Just off Tacoma, there's a little island that houses the worst of the worst. And these are sexual predators that have done their jail time, but are not deemed safe to let go. So they go on this island. Voluntarily. Go hang out on this island, and they can be in treatment or not. If they go to treatment while they're on the island, they might have a chance of getting out. Otherwise, they stay there indefinitely.
Wow.
Yeah, that's where they stay.
And is that a taxpayer thing?
$165,000 a year per sexual offender. Yeah.
$165 per year?
Right. $165,000 a year to keep each one there.
So is that to hopefully prevent the worst predators from being in our neighborhoods? Is that
right. 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 Well, that's the theory. And of course, most of them in there are saying, no, I wouldn't be safe if you let me loose.
Right.
And so that's cool. We like that, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's personal responsibility a little bit at that point. I think the price is a little high.
Well, I mean, they've got TV and they've got internet. They've got internet. They've got computers. They don't have internet access.
Right.
They have magazines, but no catalogs. They're not they have to, so they cut out all the pictures of kids in underwear. I mean, it's just crazy. So they've got books, they've got different things, they've got rec time, and most of them are, can wander free on the 5 acres that are there, can wander around. And it looks, it's razor wired in the whole island and stuff like that. But, so pretty much having a life there. And there's one woman there. And they had a very candid conversation with her.
Wait, one
woman
offender
out
of everybody.
Yeah, and she says she believes it is not just because women don't offend that much; it's because they just don't get caught.
I see.
And after she had been caught, she copped to 15 or 20 offenses. She was a toddler, an infant and toddler offender, in their care. So she was the nanny babysitter. And though she said she had abused over 100, but she'd only gotten, sentenced for 15 or 20. And it was really kind of, it was kind of scary. I mean, basically what she said was that she targeted kids and families. She targeted single moms or families that looked like they could not, they weren't giving kids what they need. So
adequate care was the
adequate care,
mm-hmm.
right? That the kids were dirty or they weren't cared for well or whatever, and she would step in and say, I'll help out.
So this was a clue. So number one, she'd be accepted more readily because they needed the help,
right?
And then this seemed also like a clue somehow that these children were okay to molest because they probably wouldn't get the proper care and attention anyway.
Well, it was kind of one of those things where she was caring for the kids and she was doing these pretty heinous things to them. In fact, she said at one point she was smothering a baby with a pillow, and her friend happened to be there and said she probably shouldn't do that, and she stopped. Though she said that if her friend hadn't been there, she probably wouldn't have stopped.
Right. Interesting.
So, this is seriously messed up stuff, people. I mean, obviously, that's pretty distressing to consider what she was doing to these infants and these toddlers. And, she said basically, she looked for the right type of people. People that probably wouldn't notice as much or care as much if their children were screaming and crying every time she showed up.
Right.
And she said, she was saying, if you have children and they don't want to go with somebody, don't make them go with the person. They know. Don't force them to go with the person.
Right. So do we have a headline on this, or are we just this?
Well, the headline on this is we're going to talk about sexual abuse and the different ways that it looks at it, because, well, not only so Oprah was doing this, and they were talking about they talked to a bunch of male predators and what to look for and what kind of things happen and what is sexual abuse. A lot of us just think of sexual abuse as somebody actually having sex with a child. If we talk about child sexual abuse, what almost everybody said was that it wasn't strangers. 99.99% of sexual abuse is perpetrated by somebody knows.
Exactly.
Right. And, so they said the worst thing in the world was I think it was the 80s when they had the whole stranger danger thing.
Yep.
Teaching kids to be scared of strangers.
Yeah. When
really it was the people at home that they should have been more afraid of.
Exactly.
So they said that was a little bit of
it was didn't get rolled out correctly.
Right.
Didn't help.
Right. That could have been a little bit different there. So, I think we're going to talk a little bit about this. We're going to talk about what sexual abuse can look like. And then you and I just recently did a project that we'll talk about a little bit.
Right.
About what's going on. Now, there was somebody I think that called in earlier. Don't know if they were actually calling in to talk to us or what they were doing, but I'll ask Sam in a minute here because, of course, Sam's on the phone, so I always want to talk to Sam when he's on the phone. But anyway, if there's a caller, you should let us know. There's no call. Okay, he went bye-bye. All right, sexual abuse. He was like calling for the psychic hotline and like, what?
Oh.
I don't want to talk about sexual abuse.
He wanted some free psychic information from the tantrics.
Yeah. It's like, you will not be him being on the phone because we're talking about sexual abuse. That's how psychic I am. So, all right. We recently participated in a documentary.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's a group that is going around the country and teaching at schools, and they're teaching how to
recognize predators.
Go ahead.
I was going to say they're giving, giving some information on positive measures that kids can take to avoid getting either targeted or, maybe themselves some awareness so that they can sort of speak up properly. And, the things we should really be taught for self, protection as kids, and things maybe just like sex education. Everybody's squeamish to talk about the reality of it. But the reality is, finally, that people are figuring out that there's a lot of sexual abuse going on. It's rampant and probably one of the most undiscussed. It's not really discussed, and it's a rampant problem in the United States and elsewhere.
Right, and they're saying like one out of 4 girls, and in my opinion, it's been 3 out of 4. I have very rarely ever meet somebody that hasn't suffered some type of sexual abuse.
Well, that's really interesting because in my personal experience, amongst many friends and people I've spoken with, and I tend to talk about, in-depth things with people, and I would say it's, I could say 2 out of 3. I mean, you say 3 out of 4, but you're also contacting many people in workshops. somebody could argue that maybe more people who have sexual abuse issues or even sexual esteem issues, might be inclined to take workshops on such matters, and perhaps yourself or other educators may therefore come in contact with more people who have those issues. But taken from me, taken from other people that I've talked to, taken from most women who've not only talked with me, but also with their family and their cousins and their friends, I'm pretty much finding across the board that I could say 2 out of 3 and take that to the bank.
Either way, it's a lot, right?
Exactly.
This is the problem we have, is that there's a lot going on.
Yes.
And part of the problem is that a lot of people don't realize what is sexual abuse.
Uh-huh. Well, you're saying that a lot of people think, and I would say sexual abuse is, improper touching, improper sexualization of someone who should be, protected from such things, or maybe not protected from sexuality itself, because that could have problems in its own. If you shelter somebody, then they're going to get their information somewhere else.
Right.
But sexualizing a person who should not be sexualized and is not ready for that kind of behavior until they're an adult. I mean, bottom line, that's what we're saying, but that's not what's happening in our culture, in our society.
Well, and so, what does sexualizing, so like in some countries, if people are like, in some countries, the tribe, the people that live, they all live in the same house or in the same room and that type of thing, and the parents do have sex with the children in the room. Mm-hmm. They're not showing the children the sex,
right.
But it's known that it's going on. It's quite, it's a normal thing. That's not a problem. That's not sexual abuse. In the States here, that would be considered, people could call CPS on you if that's found out that you were doing that. So, I mean, why is it one is okay and the other isn't?
Well, I don't know. I don't have a judgment on whether it's okay or not, but what I can see is whether anybody thinks it's okay or not. We have a huge amount of sexual repression and sexual ignorance in our nation. And on one hand, we are sexualizing children and victimizing children. I say we, not you and I, but as a culture, as a society, we're not even taking responsibility. We're not even ready to hear that this is happening until finally somebody like Oprah steps up, and maybe this documentary project we got involved with, maybe that will make a difference. But until now, literally till about last week, it doesn't seem like anybody was willing to really talk about it.
Well, people are talking about it, but also, they're not talking about the hard stuff. So, like, once again, what is sexual abuse? Well, it really has to do with the intent of the abuser. So when I washed my daughter, right, when she was small, I washed my daughter. I didn't have any sexualized weirdness about it. I didn't have a charge on it. It didn't do anything for me sexually or trigger any shame or guilt or anything like that. It was washing my daughter or changing my daughter. No big deal. Now, somebody that has been abused or somebody that has an issue, they carry a charge. They carry a feeling about it that isn't okay, that is either about power or arousal or something that isn't, what would be considered in the norm. And so they tend to, and they were talking about, this guy was saying, he would look at a child and become aroused by the child, and actually in his mind, he created the relationship so that it was okay. You see, he in his mind would look at the child and see the child smile at him and realize, oh my gosh, look, they understand and we're having a relationship.
Right. And then so anything beyond that would be okay because they're in a relationship.
Right.
So it's not just some stranger. I'm not perpetrating a crime on a stranger or on a child.
No.
It is somebody who is my mate in a relationship with me.
Right.
And this is what happens in these people's...
And this person's not. Right. Some other people, like the woman was talking about the fact that she just, that's just what she did. She was aroused by children, and when she was aroused, she acted out in these ways. And unfortunately, these ways had nothing to do with making love or sex. She's actually fairly violent and sadistic in what she was doing to children. And so a lot of the men were talking about how they actually want their victims to feel good. They actually weren't interested in hurting them. They actually went through a lot of patience and a lot of grooming and a lot of seduction so that what they did felt good to the person.
A percentage, though, I thought I heard there was about half and half. There was about half of the men were groomers, and about half were more maliciously inclined. So
right. So we were, at this, she was talking to that group that wasn't maliciously inclined, and talking about the time they spent grooming, the time they spent working on getting the trust, spent all that time, and in their mind, everything was fine because they were making them feel good.
Right.
And so it's really interesting how these things, but, so it's not only about sexual abuse, isn't only about being touching somebody. You can abuse a child by looking at them and having them look at you inappropriately. How do they look at you inappropriately? You're putting yourself in a position of having that sexual charge, whether you're running around naked around them all the time and not in a way that would be normal. What's normal naked? Normal naked doesn't have a charge to it. You're just naked. But if you're running around naked, hoping the child sees you and posing so the child sees you and making it a fantasy in your mind that somehow that's a turn on for the child, then you've got sexual abuse even with just, because kids feel it. They feel the intent. They feel the energy.
They're a lot more receptive to that because they're really unjaded. They're going to see things the way they are, and if there's intent there, they will feel it and they will see it because it's real, not because they're mature enough to notice it. A lot of people think, oh, well, they're just kids. If they, of course I can't speak for people, but I would imagine that that would happen. One thing I would like to point out, or ask anyway, is, we're talking about things, and I hear you talk about things about intent quite a bit. And I don't know if our listeners or our readership would understand the power and importance of intent. I mean, to really follow along with this dialogue, wouldn't they have to understand the power of intent and how it really does make it different?
Well, sure. Everything we do, conscious or unconsciously, has an intent to it. And what that means is it has, let's call it intent, an energetic charge, if you will. And so if you think right now, what is your intent? You're listening to this show. Maybe your intent is entertainment. You're pedaling away there at the gym and you've got me on your iPod and you're just like, you don't want to be bored, so you want to be entertained. So you have an intent of entertainment. Okay. You're absorbing this as entertainment. And you look across the room and you see a good-looking person, and your intent is that you would like to engage them. So all of a sudden your energy changes around how you're looking at them. Now, if you're looking at an unattractive person, your intent is to not engage them. So you're not going to put out the same vibe, the same feeling that you would. You change your intent and your energy. If your intent is to work out and not be noticed at the gym, you got your headphones on, your head down, your intent is don't notice me, I'm working out.
Right, but what happens if you're working out and you say in your mind you don't want to be noticed, but really everything about what you're doing at the gym is to get noticed?
Right, exactly.
Because secretly your true heart's intent
right.
is to be noticed. So even if you tell yourself, oh, I don't want to be noticed, and you hide, then you're always going to find yourself surprisingly annoyed by all this attention that you get.
Right. So a lot of people may not be clear about their intent, and so and hence the men that were saying, I thought they were in a relationship with me. So they their intent was to be in a relationship with this person and this child, and they turned it around so that it looked like the child was intent as well.
Yes.
That's the confusion of intent, or delusion of intent right there. So the intent in which you do anything really does make a difference. It makes a huge difference. And so the grandpa, how there's always those grandparents or whatever that, or there's always the relatives that the kids don't want to hug. And there's a lot of kids that have said to me, or a lot of that become adults, yeah, my mother always made me hug my grandfather, and I hated hugging him because it felt weird. Chances are if it felt weird, it's because Grandpa had a bad vibe. He had an intent going on that was not okay. And kids already know that. And so, you need to pay attention to your children. One of the things we did with my daughter is that If she didn't want to hug anybody, she didn't have to hug them, no matter who. I didn't care who they were. When the grandparents were upset and said, "Oh, she won't hug us," I'm like, "That's right. She'll hug you when she feels like it, and if she doesn't feel like it, that's okay too." So when you're teaching your children to have to go against what they feel is okay, you're setting them up to be victims.
Yeah, not very helpful, is it?
Right. If they don't want their body touching somebody else's, then I don't think it's appropriate to tell them they have to do it just because it's a relative. Because what are you telling them then? The next time somebody touches them that's a relative that they don't want and they don't like it, they're going to feel like they have to do it because it's polite.
Well, it reinforces that behavior. That's
right.
Sure.
Exactly. So there's, sexual abuse. It can be just that the parents are over-sexualized, like a father who thinks it's cool to share his pornography with his son that's 6. Right. Oh, he's trying to bond with his son, and at 6 and 7 and 8, he's showing him porn, and, that's their bonding thing.
Or how about the mom sharing the stories about the dates? She's, maybe a single mom going out on dates and, what has happened and, details that maybe people don't need.
Right, exactly. So any of these things can be considered sexually inappropriate, sexual abuse, and over-sexualizing children. Now, not everybody that's been abused is anti-sex. So, that's the thing, is that some people that have been abused are highly promiscuous and over-sexualized and thinking, hey, everything's great. Look I love sex. I'll have sex with everybody. I orgasm all the time, no problem, have lots of sex. It's great. They don't realize that they're acting from their woundedness as well, that what happened is they had a great groomer. Their body was really responsive to the abuse. And so, especially if they have shame attached to it because they knew that there was something wrong, they're now going out and having lots of sex in ways that makes them feel bad because it's the only way they can feel good.
Right.
And that's where we get into real trouble with trying to help fix this situation is once that shame and pleasure get mixed up together, it's a lot harder to pull it apart.
Try to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Exactly. Right. So the reason you and I, we were part of a documentary for this, this foundation?
Yep.
That is going around and teaching about abuse, what the faces of predators, what could a predator look like, what are different types of abuse, what should you watch out for, that type of thing. And you and I were a part of that because we have both suffered sexual abuse as kids.
Correct.
And so they were looking for people that would actually would be in front of a camera, and tell a little bit about the story so that in hopes that people got to see the faces of people that had been abused. Now, I kind of talked you into it because when I talked to the woman, there were no men at that point that had stepped forward. This is a really, really, really hard thing for men.
Right. Well, and let me just speak up real quick to say, keeping in mind that there is one woman incarcerated in the bad camp, so to speak. There's an island full of men. I don't know the statistics, but somewhere I heard it was close to 75%. It was either 60 or 75% of men in that camp had been molested or otherwise abused themselves. So the problem here is like hate crimes and other things which are passed generation to generation.
Right.
We have an entire society, whereas the men seem to be the offenders who get caught, and you look at your local registries and find out where they live. They're all men.
Right.
I mean, for the most part.
Yep.
Okay. And so these are the ones perpetrating the crimes. These are the ones who are themselves victimized, but they're not coming forward. And it's not out in the open.
We asked that question. It's kind of like, what is the difference between somebody who is abused that goes on to be an abuser and somebody that doesn't?
Right. Well, that would be a great question to ask, wouldn't it?
I mean, that to me, because I know several men who have been abused, who have not gone on to perpetrate sexual abuse, though they have maybe perpetrated other types of abuse. And, so it's nice that they haven't, they were molested as children. They have not gone on to molest children, though they have gone on to be impacted by the molestation anyway and act out in different ways in their life. So, excuse me, inevitably, this wounding that we have, we act out in some way. A lot of women, you see eating disorders, mainly obesity, though some anorexia, a lot of addiction with people that have been abused. and they're stuffing down or covering up the pain and trying to deal with learning how to trust people.
They're medicating the pain.
Medicating the pain, right. So you and I, we're brave. We went there. Not as brave for me, mainly because I do talk about this a lot. I talk about it in classes. I've written about it, talked about it on the radio. And, excuse me, for me, it was, I don't have a memory. I'm not one of those people that has a complete memory of my sexual abuse. I just have a snapshot, and the head is not in the snapshot. My perpetrator's head is not in the snapshot. Though, through some looking around, like looking at my sister and looking at things going on, I suspect and believe, well, at this point, believe it was my father, and actually confronted him and asked him about it. And, of course, he wasn't adamantly in denial. He did deny it, but he wasn't like, oh, I can't believe you did ask me. Though he did cut me out of the will completely after that. So that was kind of interesting. And my dad is dead now, and went to the grave saying, literally, like as he was dying, you can't even believe what I've done in my life and all of this stuff, but still no, oh my God, I'm sorry. He never came clean, but seemed to be very afraid to die. So, and then your story.
Well, my story, pretty simple story. My step-grandfather, whom abused me, I believe abused my father as well. As I stack that up, there's very few issues that could produce, at least, again, going from my experience, it really kind of hits some nerves and makes me pretty angry deep inside. So, I've lashed out in other ways. But for me, having it be a family member, then I learned later it wasn't even my blood family, really caused some serious problems because they were my caretakers. My mother and father didn't care for me full time. So really, until I was 7, and thereafter, because they were so prominent in my family, I was cared for by my abuser for a long time.
Right, and you were an infant, right? You were small.
I was an infant. It stopped about the time I was 3.
Right. And so, a lot of people would say, how do you even know that?
Well, because I remember. I am cursed with an outstanding memory, and I say cursed. It's it's a good thing. Works for me in my line of work, but at the same time, I actually have visceral memories, and I have feeling and sensational memories too. Things that I can't, put that. Okay, I've seen this with my eyes and so forth, but that's how I know. Right.
And you, for a long time, you didn't tell anybody.
Well, no, actually, I didn't. I started talking about it after I turned 21, after I had an unsuccessful attempt at suicide, almost successful. A friend saved me, brought me back, but, really not talked about. And I never went to therapy for it. And, the therapy I got was the care and attention of, my primary relationships, my significant relationships. And to some of them, I probably, probably owe the, healer's apology or apology to the healer because, they've really seen some and gone through some stuff with me, which they had no real idea why. A lot of behavioral issues, So yeah, it's had a tremendous impact on my life.
Right, and so even though you can say, you can go and have relationships and you can do all that, you've noticed. I mean, the impact is there, and that it's been a struggle. It
was going through my first Tantra workshop, an entire weekend workshop. It was after that I actually came alive and was able to start feeling things in my body and really having an experience of what it was like to feel. Because I literally just shut it all down, and I, wouldn't be touched in my relationships. That was a big deal. So,
you wouldn't allow people to touch you?
Yeah, not really. I mean, it wasn't obviously, strictly physically speaking. Technically, touch was going on, but whether I felt anything, whether I really received it, or even wanted to receive it, was a different story.
So that's been taking some while for you to work on and come back, like you say, to feel in your body.
Yeah, to feel again. I think, I specify feeling in my body. I think to a lot of people who don't really understand or don't have kind of the black and white to compare to, we might as well just call it feeling, because if you're not feeling in your body, where are you feeling? Right?
Right. Nowhere.
Yeah, well,
right.
Exactly. So,
right.
And then the, a lot of the other things.
Well, you had said at some point that you knew how you were supposed to act.
What do you mean?
Well, because I don't know, probably would anybody have described you as not feeling? I think you said that you were really good at acting. You knew what you were supposed to act like and be like. And so...
Right. Well, I've developed my mind very well because it's where I've lived to be safe and secure. I even, at a very early age, I decided not to go into an autistic state. I remember that experience pretty well. So my mind is rather developed to provide safety. I can feel things in my mind, and so in a way it's kind of real, but it's not really real. To feel something in your mind is not the same as feeling it on the tips of your fingers and, elsewhere in the body. If somebody's, even touching me in a very arousing way and I want to be touched by that person in the past, it just doesn't convey the same feeling at all. And I wasn't even hardly aware of that. So I think I would have to say, based on my experience, whether it's that extreme compared to me or not, I understand why people are walking around, they're shut down, and they're simply not even aware of what an authentic feeling is, because they're probably guarded from the pain.
Right. Well, if you think about the fact that if you're, when you're a child, that the people that you're supposed to trust and the people that are caring for you and the people that your entire life is in the hands of betray you on that level.
Yeah, so primarily the thing that kept recurring for me is, I've been a wild person. I kind of raised myself and left to my own devices, but I never wanted to get in trouble, because for me, getting in trouble meant that, my mom would give me up again and I'd go back to my abuser. So I did everything possible to be as good as possible and never, ever wanted to get in trouble, which is quite a bit for a kid, Most kids push it pretty big, and when it came to that kind of thing, never do it.
So that was a lot of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Operating in the don't send me back there because I don't know what they're going to do to me.
Exactly.
Type of thing. We're going to be right back in just a minute. We'll take a break and come back, and we're talking about the very heavy subject of sexual abuse. Be back in a minute.
I'm too sexy for your party, too sexy for your party. The way I'm disco dancing, I'm a model, you know what I mean, and I do my little turn.
Are you one of the 40 million sexless couples in the U.S.? Are you wondering why having sex leaves you feeling lonely? Are you suffering from the myths of sexual dysfunction? Do you know in your heart that there has to be more than what you're currently getting out of making love? To rid yourself of sexual ignorance, get more out of your lovemaking, and find out more about spiritual sexual connection, then you need to check out www.thetantrateacher.com to receive your free copy of the ebook called Secrets of the Tantra Teacher. Don't suffer another minute without the sexual loving and ecstatic bliss you were born to receive. Get to www.thetantrateacher.com right now. That's www.thetantrateacher.com.
Is your sex life non-existent? Do sexual dysfunctions leave you soft? Is internet porn getting more than you are? Or are you paying more attention to porn than your partner? Have you tried talk therapy and it got you nowhere? You are not alone. You can be freed from sexual shame, guilt, and dissatisfaction. A visit to the Tantra Teacher is in order. Call now and mention you heard the Tantra Teacher on the radio and get a very special offer. Stop waiting for a miracle and call right now. 206-276-2735. Phone consultations or in person will get you the information you need to be successful in your love life. But you have to call now. 206-276-2735. Stop making excuses. Call the Tantra Teacher. 206-276-2735.
Did you know that you can rate this show on iTunes? the show you're listening to right now. It's true, you can leave your thoughts about the show, the topic, the guest. You can even leave a suggestion. Then, before you leave, rate the show. The hosts love hearing from you, so next time you download this show from iTunes, leave your thoughts and rate the show, for the host and for others.
I'm too sexy for your party, too sexy for your
If I don't turn on the mic, nobody will hear me. Oh, there we are. I don't care how sexy I am. If you can't hear me, what's the point?
Hey.
Yeah, okay. So here we are. We've been talking, Max and I. Max is hanging out with me today, and we are talking about sexual abuse, and primarily sexual abuse with children, or not that we're sexually abusing children. Being sexually abused as a child and what's going on, and it's really in the forefront right now, thanks to Oprah. You know, Oprah always brings a whole bunch of stuff up, and she's done a very, very good job of doing some really candid interviews with predators and people that have been abused, survivors, and such not, about this subject that needs to come to light. And the more we talk about it, hopefully the less it's going to happen. My big question, of course, is, you know, what's the difference? How do some people, because almost everybody who sexually abuses somebody has been abused before. You know, it's high.
It's a cycle.
Yeah, it's high numbers, and it's a cycle. And what's the difference? You know, what is the difference? I mean, you know, why do some people go on to abuse and others do not? You know,
I would take a stab at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking, you know, I seem to remember the corporate personality profiling, and you know, one of the major divisions between people are you're either introverted or extroverted. And I would have to say that this introversion or extroversion, we think of them as, oh, somebody's really, you know, living out loud, they're gregarious, they're big, they're going to do stuff, or somebody's kind of sticks to themselves as shy. I really think that there's probably a deeper component of this in the psyche, which says, well, somebody's either going to sort of suffer quietly, take it upon themselves, be more inclined to inflict the wounds and take out the rage, or deal with it on their own, or they're going to process it literally through and out of themselves through their behaviors. This would be classic introversion or classic extroversion with anything else. So why wouldn't that be true of an abuse cycle as well? In other words, if something happens to you, and you go through a process of, first you're angry, you know, in other words, grief resolution. What's that stuff that you do? You
the
go
seven steps, the 4 that we don't know right now.
Right, the 4 that I don't know right now.
With the incredible mind that you have.
Right. Well, incredible in some ways, I guess. No, I know, but I know everybody else does, and I don't want to take all the airtime to reiterate it. I don't think everybody needs an education on that whole thing right now. I just think that that would be my guess is, you know, statistically, maybe not in 100% of the cases. You can't say because somebody's boisterous and obnoxious and they look like an extrovert that's really the truth. A lot of people cover their wounds and defenses by acting out. Right?
Well, I mean, so what do you think now? Why wouldn't you have perpetrated abuse? I mean, what kept you from being an abuser?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, there's some ways that I was, you know, there's things that have been done to me that I've done to other people. For example, not sexually speaking, you know, but power-wise, or, you know, I was yelled at. So I have no problem. You know, if I get angry and upset, I can get triggered and I can really lose my temper bigger than I want to. So in that regard, as a character, as a person, I certainly have no, you know, moral high ground that, oh, I'm not going to do that. For me, I think it's for me, I just feel like there's a certain respect that's owed. And I felt this way from a young child, that there's a certain respect that's owed to, in a woman, the sacred space, in a man, the genitalia, because these are really sensitive, vulnerable parts. Because I was wounded, I just simply couldn't imagine doing that to somebody. It's too special for me to want to go and ruin it. For me, the light at the end of the tunnel is having some respect and something sacred and some appreciation for it. So it's just something that I wouldn't do.
Interesting. And so for, how I found out that I was sexually abused, remember, like I said, I didn't really have, any direct memory of it. But what happened was I was triggered by a story of incest when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And what I mean by triggered is that I was reading this story in the newspaper and I became aroused by it. And I was like, oh my God, that's horrifying. What is wrong with me? What in the hell is wrong? Because that is not normal. That should not be okay. This is my judgment of, what I'm reading. And I'm like, oh my God. So I immediately thought, okay, there's something not okay here. That's just weird. And so, of course, in my world, whenever something was weird or I wanted to know about something, I headed to a bookstore or a library or whatever and started reading. And so I'm starting to read through things about sexuality and things about, psychology, abnormal psychology and sexuality and all this, and came across a sexual abuse book that had this whole long list of, I think it was 22 questions. And so I took it quickly and scored, really high. I think I only missed 2. I was affirmative on everything but 2 questions. And it said, if you score more than 5, chances are I'm like up there in the 20. Bought the book, took it home, had a friend of mine take it that I didn't think had been abused, and she got 2. Took it over to a friend who I knew had been abused, and he got 15. And I was like, crap, and there was always this snapshot, and I had all these sleep issues. I was a kid that absolutely freaked out about sleeping. And even as a teenager and as an adult, I was a freak with sleep, didn't like it, didn't feel safe, wasn't interested and in sleeping at all. That's just one of those things. And then I started thinking, oh my gosh, so okay, well, so it was somebody. Then I remembered a couple of abuses that weren't by my dad, but were later on when I was a teenager. One was a guy at the gym. I wanted to be a bodybuilder, and I went to work out at this gym, and one of the trainers there was like, oh, you want to be a bodybuilder? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, great, well, we have to, get you ready. Let's go get some measurements and do this kind of stuff. And I was, didn't know anything about it. So I'm like, okay. So I go, he says, oh, we're going to do this over here. And so he takes me into the boiler room. Okay, the boiler room of the gym with 3 of his buddies and has me stripped down to my underwear, so they can take measurements. And I felt weird, obviously. I did not feel okay about this. I was seriously like that. Something felt very wrong about this. But I also didn't want to be naive. I didn't want to feel stupid.
Right.
And they're like, kind of like, well, you're going to be a bodybuilder. You're going to show off your body. What's wrong? Right? And it's like, so it was a horrible experience in that sense. And when I left, I was thinking, I can't go back there. But I had a contract. And so I actually stood up for myself. I wrote a letter to the company saying, you're going to nullify my contract because your trainer did X, Y, and Z. And I wrote out the story and I sent it to the company, who of course immediately canceled my contract for me. But I felt like, and I took it to my dad, and my dad's reaction was really interesting. He asked me what I had done to cause this. And so this kind of clued me, so then I started looking at my father, like I had 2 half sisters, and my dad hated their husbands, no particular reason, hated their husbands. I remember then a time that my dad open-handedly took me down after seeing me kiss a man, a boy, when I was like 16 or something like that. And he was jealous. I remember now, I could look back and go, it was jealous. It wasn't like,
Yeah, it wasn't like you whore something that, you as a child, I disagree with you doing this.
Right.
This was like the way you'd, caveman beat down a woman who had slept out on you. Right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And so I started seeing all these kind of interesting things. And there's a way that men will hug women with larger breasts. You hug them and then you run you squish their, your arms into their breasts on the side. I don't know if you've ever done that, but
yes, I have.
But then I realized, I think my dad used to hug me like that or hug us like that, and just some odd things. And then when I had my child all the way up until, I was 42 and I was breastfeeding her, and he was like, oh, can I take some pictures of that? And it's like, okay. And then I realized while he was doing that, it's not really that he was taking pictures of her, because he wasn't really interested in taking pictures of her. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of sealing the deal. But so clearly there's that issue there, and clearly finding out. So what I wanted to say around all this is that for a long time, I did not want to have children. And I didn't know whether, I absolutely rejected children. It wasn't just that I didn't like them, but I absolutely rejected children. I didn't want to look at them, didn't want to see them, didn't want anything to do with them, didn't babysit, didn't do anything. And I don't know if that's because I was afraid of myself. And when I came to that realization, I actually went out and sat out in a playground, and opened myself up completely to the, do children arouse me? If that's the case, I need to know it, because then I'd need help, right? But I mean, so I really just went for it. I'm like, okay, let's just find out if I'm sick and there's something really wrong with me and I'm going to perpetuate this and I should be locked up or I should get help. And, it's not the case. I'm not aroused by children. For the longest time, I would have fantasies of incest, and I realized I was reliving my abuse. And, of course, there's a lot of shame and guilt around that, having that experience or feeling that way. And I think that a lot of people are scared, when you have these feelings. And so what I'm thinking is, so if somebody has those feelings, right? So they've been abused and they've got this shame, feel good stuff all mixed up in one. And they are having fantasies about the reliving of their abuse. It's going to be not that hard to think that that's what really turns you on. In other words, it does. In the fantasy, in the reliving of the abuse, maybe not in the new thing, but you can certainly target that. So, that's what I'm saying. How does one become a sexual abuser?
Right.
Well, if you're in this fantasy and you're living this over and over again, and you believe that that's the number one trigger, you're laying those neural pathways down over and over again in your brain, then that becomes your turn on. And then you can justify, that's what arouses you, so I just do it.
Right. Well, people, it's an addictive style behavior, and it's an addictive pattern in society. It's a cycle that keeps repeating over and over.
Well, and then we're sexualizing kids. I mean, we're putting little girls and kids in teenage clothes. I look around sometimes at what parents allow or put their children in, and I'm appalled. It's like we're over-sexualizing our children, making our little girls look, like teens, in little bikinis and in these little skirts with the, love across the butt or whatever, these clothes that we put the kids in, and we're thinking, oh, okay, well, that's not supposed to point out something to somebody who's already got a problem, who's already warped, right? Why do we dress our children like that?
Well, I don't know. I think the society actually really wants to perpetuate the average loss of virginity at the age of 11 or 12 years old, as it is today.
Wow. So, we're hitting some pretty heavy topics here this evening, something to contemplate and think about if you're out there going, oh my God, I've never actually heard somebody say that out loud.
Well, and yet in America, not to be terribly political, by the way, our views do not represent the views of Contact Talk Radio. But we still can't get straight information legitimized in the schools. It's a problem, and there are many, I don't want to say agencies because that sounds like government agencies, but there are many groups and factions of people, including some religions, where they seem to believe that their methods are working, and these are where the biggest problems is. There's no education. The abuse is being perpetuated cycle after cycle, generation after generation. It's happening to people. It's not just a few people that Oprah has interviewed. It is in every single state of our nation.
Yeah.
It is worse in the poor states. It's not any better in the rich ones.
Right.
It's just the fact that this is happening over and over and over again. And if you look at the numbers worldwide, obviously we come from somewhere. We come from a European culture primarily. Okay. But this is happening worldwide. There are maybe some, things that are illuminated about abuses against children in Africa and other nations. And people think it's just something that happens in a third world nation.
Nope.
Well, there's a lot more community and a lot more tribe and a lot more healthy sexual values in a lot of those communities, your average community.
Yep.
Here, what I see the problem is that there's this sort of hoity-toity, oh, we don't need the information. That dirty sex stuff is just not going to get into our children. And guess what? It's getting in your children at 11 years old or far younger, right from within the family, whether it's an uncle or a father or a mother in some cases.
The average they were talking about was between like 4 and 8 was the abuse. And so, Yeah, so it is happening, and we've got to wake up, and we've got to see it. And here's the deal. If you have a feeling about your child, like you have a feeling like something might not be okay with a member of your family or something, don't be polite. I had somebody say to me, well, we're really worried about offending our cousin who he wants to come stay with us for a while, and we just feel a little weird about him and the kids, and but we don't want to offend him. Sorry, offend him, keep your kids safe. My daughter, when her grandparents wanted to babysit her before she was verbal, and I said no, nobody's babysitting her before she can fully express herself. They asked me, what, don't you trust us? And I said, no, actually, I don't trust anybody. She's got one childhood, and it's my job to keep her safe. So she's not raised to be scared of people, because that's the other thing I don't want her to be. But she's also raised that basically make noise. Here's the deal. If you teach your child to be polite to everybody all the time, chances are they're probably going to be more of a victim. In other words, there's ways to teach your child to be polite, but there's also ways to teach her. I told my daughter, if somebody ever grabs you and you don't want them to, you be as rude as you can be. Scream, bite, yell, whatever it takes. Don't worry about being polite. Chances are it's going to be somebody your child knows, and chances are it's going to be a situation that they've been put in and told that they should deal with. And you need to take a look as a parent and say, is my child acting funny around those people? And it doesn't matter if they're church, police, it doesn't matter who it is, right? We have to take care of our kids. And if you think something weird's going on, then it's your job as a parent to step up. If you're a parent that's having a problem being an abuser, then go get some help.
Yeah, go get some help and some counseling. This is something that, we're talking about the, sensational aspect, and it's really easy to point a finger and say how awful everybody is, whether they're a murderer or an abuser or whatever it is. One thing that Tantra does is teach, it definitely teaches better values, more empowerment around sexuality. It does have the impact of helping people to heal. And certainly for me, what it did for me was help me feel again in my body. It's increased my compassion because of that. And I would just like to say that this is obviously a problem that is a community, a social problem. And I don't think that it's going to stop by just pointing fingers at people, shucking them away to an island somewhere. I think it's a huge problem. It starts with the education of children, and it also ends with many untreated adults who maybe they're not even suffering improper abuse, but do we really know how to love each other as a society? And I think this is the remaining problem that we have today, is how many crimes have been perpetrated, and how do we actually get everybody back into the fold and actually create some kind of, peace again in society? How does that work?
Right, and we're not advocating, it's okay to go out and be an abuser. So anybody that actually thought that maybe that's what we were saying, people say some crazy things, have said.
They take what we say and twist it around. Did I say something kind of edgy?
Something, like we should love everybody. Basically, if you have weird feelings, if you've got problems, if you've been sexually abused at all, go and talk about it. Get some help, talk, get it out there, even if you're afraid of what that's going to mean. But, the thing you've got to understand is, we're kids once. We wear that wounding for the rest of our lives. Tantra, we do have some sexual healing rituals. I do teach classes on sexual healing that are some amazing things. And in a couples sacred intimacy class teaches sexual healing rituals to couples that they can help heal each other if any or one of them suffers, or both, from sexual abuse. And it's amazing stuff. It really does work. And it's a safe and wonderful way to create that intimacy with your partner and let go of some of the pain of their past that's maybe keeping you held back. So as always, we're open to, drop me an email, drop me a phone call, say, hey, I heard this, what is this stuff about sexual abuse? I believe I even have a coaching class on healing through sexual abuse. So a wonderful topic. I mean, we'll talk more about it because there's other things to talk about in this topic. It needs to get out. We need to talk about it more. And please, the shame you feel or the guilt you feel, you can get through and you can get over. And there is healing to be had. All right? So just know that. Keep the faith all. And what do we got? 10 seconds, counting down. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you, talk to you next week. Thanks, Max, for being my guest.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Take care.
You have been listening to the Tantra, Love, Sex, and Intimacy Show with your host, Tanya Diamond. Visit our website at www.tanyadiamond.com. That's TANJA for more information on workshops and classes.